In this video, I'm going to explain in some more detail how I made my pizza oven, and more importantly, how you can make yours. I'm going to look at different materials and methods you can use to make the floor of the oven, the cooking floor of the oven, the base, the dome, including different types of mold, depending on how you choose to make it, the archway and doorway, the chimney, and then finally the final insulation and finish for the oven. Each part of the build will have its own video chapter, which I'll put at the bottom, and you can skip ahead to a different section if you want to look at a specific part. I will go over all the main options for the different parts of the build, looking mostly at cost and also convenience, difficulty level. Some ways of building the oven will require more skill and maybe more labor intensive, or require specific tools that you may or may not have. And that will obviously then influence how you choose to make it. Before I start the demo, I want to thank the video sponsors Vitcas, which is where I bought about 95% of the materials to make my own oven. As a paying customer, sadly, I wasn't sponsored at the time. Vitcas specialise in selling heat-proof, heat-resistant materials to trade and DIY, including for home oven builds like this and like we're going to go over, but also for the plumbing and heating industries and fireplace and stove insulation. So your best place to do what I did, which is go direct to their website. I will put links in the description for all the products I use today, but also I'd recommend you check out their website generally to see what else they have to offer. So you've got your platform for the oven, your plinth, at the right height that you like it. In this case, it's about belly button high, and also of course the right size so you can fit the size of the oven you want to make. For you, this will most likely be made out of either concrete slabs or a poured reinforced concrete base. Just for this demo, I'm using pieces of ply on top of a pallet, but you can use your imagination. From your concrete platform, the first consideration is insulation for the base. Option 1 is applying a thick base layer of a mixable heat-proof insulation material, such as vermiculite concrete. The second option is to use a pre-made heat-proof insulation board, which is what I did and what I recommend because it's a lot easier and quicker and is cost-effective for what you get. For my oven build, I used this material, which is a ceramic fibre insulation board from Vitcas. It gets used in boiler ducts and kiln linings and is resistant to 1260 degrees centigrade. This is just an offcut from the piece that I used, but it comes as a large rectangular board, which should be easily large enough to fit any domestic-sized oven you're making. But if, like me, you do need to cut or shape it in any way, it's very, very easy to do just using a regular handsaw. All I would say is I would recommend you wear a dust mask and use gloves. When I used the board for my oven build, I also used this product, which is a ceramic fibre adhesive, which I applied to the concrete using a caulking gun and then put the board down on top. But truthfully, and apologies to the sponsors, but this is not necessary. You don't need this product. I mean, it's quite cheap, it's only 10, 15 pounds maybe, but it really is just a bit of overkill. The board is so large, you've got a massive surface area between the board and the concrete beneath, so there's a lot of friction there. And also it's quite heavy itself because it's very dense to withstand the compressive force, so it won't move. And then, of course, not only have you got the weight of the board, you're going to immediately start putting on more weight on top of this because you're going to add the floor and then build up the whole oven. So you could be adding 100 or 200 kilograms of weight on top of the board. So to be honest, I would not buy this and you can live without it. All you need to do then is a very, very simple process. You literally just buy the board and you place the whole thing down in one go. Imagine a bigger board, and then you're ready to start putting the cooking floor on top of it. If you do want to go for the option of using a mixable material as a thick base layer instead of the insulation board, then what you want is called vermiculite concrete. Vermiculite is a high temperature insulation material that comes loose, and you can buy it direct, including from Vitcas. You want a mixture of 5 parts vermiculite to 1 part Portland cement. Just mix it by hand in a builder's tub like this, and gradually add water until you get a sort of porridge oatmeal consistency, which you can then pour or shovel out onto the concrete till you create a layer a few inches thick. But in my view, it's not any cheaper to use vermiculite concrete. It takes more time and effort to make the mixture, apply it, allow it to dry out, and therefore using some type of insulation board, ceramic fibre or calcium silicate, and just applying the board straight down and building on top of that is the obvious choice to go with. For the actual floor of the oven, the surface you'll be cooking on and building a fire on, there are 3 main options. The first option is a larger pre-manufactured oven base. It comes as a slab of a refractory material, typically maybe in 2 to 4 pieces because they'll be quite heavy, and you simply lay them down on top of your insulation board. Option 2 is a mixable refractory material, which is what I used. So you mix it up by hand by adding water in a bucket, and then you apply it yourself effectively to create your own slab. And then option 3 is fire bricks, which come in several different sizes. Option 1, which is applying the large pre-manufactured slab or pieces of slab, is by far the easiest and most convenient because it's similar to the insulation board. You're simply applying 2 or 3 large pieces, typically piecing them together, and that's effectively job done. But you pay for that convenience because, and in my opinion, it's not cost effective at all, because to achieve a similar floor area and similar volume, similar depth, overall volume of the floor, it's going to cost you 2 or 3 times as much money to get a pre-manufactured slab or 2 or 3 pieces of slab than it would if you use fire bricks or a wet mixture. So once again, apologies to the sponsors, but that's out the window. I don't think it's worth your money to do that. More typically, that comes in a pre-manufactured kit. So when you buy an oven kit where each piece comes and then you piece it together. But if you're building your own oven from scratch to your own design, using either fire bricks or a wet mixture is more appropriate and, as I said, in my opinion, a lot more cost effective. Option 2 is to make your own mixture, which is really easy. I use this product, which is called Vitcas Heatproof Screed, but in a generic sense it's a refractory heatproof material, heatproof cement, concrete-like material. It can also be used for making replacement fire bricks or plugging gaps in fire bricks. The mixture is really easy to use, so I found the best way is to transfer the contents of the tub to a builder's tub, a larger tub like this, because the tubs become quite full, and then gradually add water. I think the tub instructs about 4 litres per tub, but it's easiest to add it in small batches using a watering can, and then you can gradually mix up to ensure you get the right consistency. It should be a trowelable consistency, a bit like a sort of thick oatmeal. And as always, you should wear a dust mask and goggles when mixing it up because you might get splashes in your eyes. And once you've made the mixture, it's simply a case of applying it directly onto the insulation board and then getting it to a thick layer, perhaps 2 or 3 inches thick. The board itself is 2 inches, so you want to at least get the same thickness as this board. If you can manage it, it's best to mix up a whole tub in one go and then pour the whole thing out onto the insulation board because you'll need 2 or 3 of them to create the whole cooking floor, depending on how large you're making it. In my experience, as long as you mix it okay and don't make it too watery, it's so stiff, the mixture, it doesn't really require a mold or a former because it will stay solid at the edges. It isn't really slipping off the side of the board. If you do use a wet mixture for any part of the build, I would strongly recommend you get one of these, which is a concrete finishing trowel, which will make it a lot easier to be able to apply it and get a smooth, consistent, compacted finish. I mean, can you manage using a regular trowel or a wood offcut or something? Yes, you can, but I think it will make your life a lot easier and it's worth the investment getting one of these. So the wet mixture option, using the Heatproof Screed from Vitcas in my case, is very easy, very straightforward. You mix it up in a tub, you pour it onto the insulation board, you allow it to cure. It's a very straightforward way of doing it. The downsides to the wet mixture option are, in terms of getting the same depth and the same volume from using fire bricks, you're looking at more money, realistically. And you may want to have the thermal mass that comes from having a deeper floor. And the other downside is, of course, that this is a wet mixture and you have to allow it to cure, as I say, probably for at least 48 hours, possibly longer, until you start then to build up the oven dome on top of this. Whereas bricks, of course, are a preformed product, so you can lay them out and you can start building up on top of them. And for those 2 main reasons, that's why I recommend using bricks for the oven floor and not using a wet mixture in the way that I did. So fire bricks are my recommendation for the floor. And being the classic choice, of course, they're very widely available, including direct from Vitcas. They typically come in 3 sizes, so same width and length but different depths, 32, 64 and 76 millimeters. The middle one, 64 millimeters, is what is typically used for an oven floor. The main reason I didn't use fire bricks on my oven floor is just because my platform was a slightly odd shape, which meant I would have had to do quite a bit of brick cutting, and I wanted to avoid doing that. If you've just got a large square or rectangular platform for your base, you can get away without doing any brick cutting for the floor, which is why I recommend it. To make a cooking floor of 1 meter square, you'll need about 40 of these, and you can lay them down on top of your insulation in either a herringbone or an offset pattern, which I will demonstrate. Even though the insulation board is a pre-manufactured product, so it's perfectly level, what you will find is that even when using the same depth of fire brick, so 64 millimeters, there will still be very slight discrepancies, so the surface will not be completely smooth. So I would recommend you still use some form of leveling compound on top of the insulation that you apply your bricks into, and then you can tap them down to ensure you get a consistent finish. That way, when you're using your peel and going over the oven floor, it won't catch so much on the edges. Most guidance recommends using a thin layer of fire clay or sand, or a mixture of the two. So just a thin layer, and then start laying your bricks down in an offset pattern, so one brick is halfway up the other brick. Now you do not need to put mortar between the sides of the bricks. All you want to do is try to achieve a tighter finish as possible. Once you've got the bricks as level and as tightly packed as you can, you could, of course, if you've got the brick cutting tools and you feel confident in that, you could cut bricks to make this more of an even shape, maybe even a rounded shape. But what I'm going to do instead is simply fill in some of these gaps using a bit of Heatproof Screed material. If you do put the Heatproof Screed mixture at the edges like this, you are likely to get some on the bricks a little bit, but these bricks at the very perimeter are not in fact going to be inside the oven, because the oven floor will be here in the middle and the walls will be built on these outside bricks. And in this way, in my view, you can make a brick floor without doing any cutting at all. It obviously looks a bit odd at the edges, but again, similar to the insulation board underneath, you can cover it all from view by using your whatever veneer you're going to use for the final finish of your oven. Now you've got your cooking floor, it's time to move on to the dome. And the options effectively are the same. You can either make it out of fire bricks or you can use a refractory mixture. Vitcas Heatproof Screed in my case. Now the main reason I didn't use fire bricks in my oven is I just think it's a far more difficult, more labour intensive method for building the dome. Depending on the size of your oven, you might be using 100 plus bricks, and you'll need to apply a layer of heatproof mortar between each one when you're bonding them. And realistically for a dome, inevitably you're going to have to cut and shape the bricks, in particular when you get towards the top and you're filling in the final hole right at the top of the dome. And as I said, I think for the floor you can get away using brick without cutting and shaping so much, but you can't do that for building the dome. So you will need to have some form of brick cutting tools and be able to cut these to shape. I just think the brick dome is quite complicated and difficult for a beginner. I think it's much simpler to go for the option of using a former in the middle and then building a dome over that using a mixture. I would say that using fire bricks is likely to give you more thermal mass because you build up the walls in this orientation, and that way is about 4 inches thick, 4.5 inches thick. To get walls of a similar thickness using a mixture material will be more expensive most likely. So if you do want to have a very thick oven wall, if you're building a bigger oven or perhaps you want to use it for longer periods of time, you might want to consider the brick. But if you do want to make it out of brick, there are obviously lots of other videos you can find on YouTube for making brick ovens specifically. To use a wet mixture to make your dome, you first need a former or a mold to build it over. If you've seen other oven making videos on here, you've probably seen people use an exercise ball or a space opera in this case, which is a very simple way of making a mold for a dome. It's simply a process of getting a piece of plywood that's large enough to fit the diameter of your ball, cutting a circle in it. You can draw out a circle using a piece of string and a pen, a circle that's slightly smaller than the diameter of your ball, and then inflating the ball into the cut out circle you put in the plywood so that half of it is protruding above and half of it below. And then what you're doing is you're building the dome over the top half of the ball. So it's quite easy. The major downside to that is you cannot then build it in position because you've got the lower half of the ball protruding beneath the plywood. So you'd have to build it somewhere else, allow it to set, and then lift the whole thing up and apply it down onto your floor. One benefit of using half the blow-up ball as your former is because it's a manufactured product, it's very easy then to get a nice uniform dome shape. Whereas if you're making the former yourself out of wet sand, which is what I did, it can be a little bit tricky to get a nice even shape. Not too difficult, but obviously it's not manufactured like this, you're making it yourself. But the thing about using sand and why I recommend it and why I used it is it gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of the shape of your dome, the height of your dome, the size of your dome, and also means you could then use the same material for making a former for your archway as well. So you can do the whole thing in one go. I use dampened sharp sand to make my former, and you can buy sharp sand anywhere, it's not expensive. I think it's about £2 or £3 per bag, and I used about 10 bags to make my former, which was for a 70 centimeters internal diameter oven. You do need a fair amount of it, and if you're making a bigger oven, obviously you'll need more. You might need 15 to 20 bags. In terms of cost, it's not that different to the ball. To buy the ball and a piece of ply, you're looking at maybe 20, 30 pounds. Pretty similar to buy the sand. But I suppose the downside to the sand is you then end up with a load of sand at the end, which you may not need. It's obviously very easy to apply and to shape. I would simply recommend that you draw out a circle of the diameter of the oven you want, the internal diameter for the dome, using a piece of chalk or charcoal. In fact, whilst I've got the fire pit, I should talk about a third method for building a dome, which I did actually strongly consider myself, which is using a combination of brick and then using a refractory mixture. So there's a method where you could buy what this is, which is just a domed, simple domed steel fire pit. This one is 70 centimeters in diameter, but you can get ones that are slightly larger than that, and then draw a circle around it on your floor, as I did before. And then you can start by building a ring of fire bricks all around that circle. I haven't got enough to show you, but imagine a complete ring of fire bricks all the way around this circle, just with a gap for where the doorway opening would be. And you can bond these with the outdoor oven cement and use some Heatproof Screed in the gaps in the middle. Build a dome over this as a former using the Heatproof Screed. Not in position, obviously, because you can't leave the steel fire pit in there and you won't be able to get it out. And then, once it's complete, lift it in position and place it down on the ring of fire bricks you put round. Again, you'd have to put some outdoor oven cement on top of the whole of the ring of fire bricks and bond that down. So in some respects, using that method, you get the best of both worlds. So you get the cheap and easy way of building up thermal mass and getting some big height on your oven by using fire bricks in a vertical orientation. Using that method, you can use bricks for quite a lot of the build without having to do any cutting or shaping because you're just using them as they are. And then you can use a wet mixture to get the actual dome shape simply to place on top when it's dried out. So that should be relatively straightforward. It does come with the added cost of buying the fire pit. I think that was £50. To any UK viewers, I'll put a link to that in the description, but you should be able to find similar products anywhere. They're not that expensive and shouldn't be that difficult to find. And then using that method, you can have a lot less sand. I would still argue you would want sand to build a shape for your archway and doorway, but it would obviously be a lot less in volume than what you have for the whole dome. For shaping a sand former, you just want to shape it and pat it down as best you can by hand to get a nice smooth dome. In terms of size, getting the right size, the diameter is quite straightforward. You just mark out what you want, the size you would like. And for working out the height of your former, and therefore the internal height of the dome, the guidance I saw and followed was that you should base that on a ratio compared to your doorway. So if, for example, you're using a door like this, which is a freestanding door from Vitcas, you can measure the height of your door, which would be the height of your opening to the oven. So this is 25 centimeters high. And then the guidance I saw and followed is that the doorway should be 63–64% of the total height of your oven. So all you would do then is you would take the height of your doorway, whatever doorway you're using or doorway size you want to have, multiply that by 1.56, and that will then give you the internal height of your dome and therefore the height you want for your former. So for this case, 25 by 1.56 is 39 centimeters. The way I did that is quite simple. I just used a piece of strip wood, or you can use a piece of dowel like this, put it in the center, measure it to the height you want. So 39 centimeters, you would measure it out, cut it to size. So 39 centimeters would stop, let's say about there. And then you would just build up and over to that height, creating a dome shape as best you can. At the end, when you're scooping out all the sand as I did from the inside, you can then pull out that piece of wood. And then it's a case of mixing up the Vitcas Heatproof Screed like I showed you before, and then applying it onto the sand former. In a lot of the demo videos I saw, they use what we call cling film in the UK, a cellophane wrap, to wrap over the dome like that. But I found that very, very difficult to apply and to stick down. It wouldn't stick to it. So I ended up using wet newspaper, which I found a lot more straightforward. Just dampen it down and then it burns off at the end when you start your first fires inside the dome. So making the former for the dome from sand is quite straightforward. It'll take a bit of time to get the right shape and size you want, but it's fairly easy. In terms of the thickness of the dome, if you're using a wet refractory mixture, using the Heatproof Screed, I would say you're looking for a thickness of approximately 3 inches. It won't be quite as thick as if you used brick to make your oven walls, but it will be sufficient thermal mass, meaning you can build up and retain that heat. For the doorway and archway, there are several options. So doors, there are 3 main options really. One, no door. It's not an essential requirement. You would think that it would help to hold in the heat, but provided your oven has sufficient thermal mass in the dome and in the floor, and you've built up the heat sufficiently for long enough, not having a door shouldn't hugely affect the temperature. I chose to have a door partly to stop waste getting in there, animals and leaves and other things, to try and keep it clean and free of things. I chose this type of door, option 2, which is where it's built into a frame, it's hinged, so you can build the frame into the structure of your oven, and the door's on a hinge and you can close it like this. And this door is from Vitcas and it's quite a good size. And the main reason I suppose I chose it is because it fits an archway that I also bought from them. So I bought a preformed, pre-manufactured archway as a bit of a shortcut, which has a built-in chimney hole as well, which was very easy to use, but again, you kind of pay for that convenience. But I simply built up a couple of fire bricks out of side using the outdoor oven cement and then put the whole archway on top. And this doorway is designed to fit that archway perfectly, so it worked very easily for me. So that is one option. And I fit this doorway using Vitcas fire cement around the edges and a caulking gun, just applying it all around the edges of the doorway frame and then putting it into that gap. But if I made my oven again, I would go for the third option, which is to use one of these freestanding doors, which has no frames, it's not built into a frame, there's no hinge. It's just a single piece of sheet metal, although this is quite heavy duty. It's a good quality one with 3 feet, so it's very stable on the back and front. This is also from Vitcas. And these freestanding doorways, because they're simpler and use less material, they're typically a lot cheaper. This one I think is less than half the price of this one, so I think it's a good option. But all of the options are perfectly fine, and ultimately you may just decide to go on the basis of what you like and what you choose aesthetically you think looks good for your oven. That might be a freestanding doorway if you find one you like, but you might find a door built into a frame that you prefer. And I'm going to show how using the sand former, you can build an archway to fit a freestanding doorway like this. So if you imagine there's a whole big sand former behind this for your dome, you can simply use the same material to use your door as a template and create an arch shape. Considering that you want to be able to fit this door into the arch, so you don't want it to be very right at the front, you want to be able to go into the arch perhaps an inch or so. So you want the sand former to be slightly bigger than the door, perhaps a few millimeters either side, meaning you'll be able to slot this freestanding door into the arch. So you use whatever door you bought as a template, shape it as best you can, meaning that once you've applied the wet mixture over that and it's dried and cured, and you take the sand out, you should then be able to slot your door into that to fit. So I think this is a very cheap and easy way of getting a former for your archway. At this point we can consider the chimney, because the chimney will go here in the archway between the door and the dome, which will start around here. For your chimney, you first just need to decide what type of chimney you would like. They're typically either stainless steel or matte black, and maybe 10 or 15 centimeters in diameter, and of course the varying heights, depending on where you're putting your oven. As I said, I took a shortcut to put mine in because I got a preformed archway with a pre-cut hole, and simply bought a chimney from Vitcas and slotted it into it. But you can replicate that quite easily using the same sand former we've got here for the archway. You can make a hole of whatever diameter you want in the archway you're making from the mixture, using some form of shape. The easiest way I would suggest would be to buy some cheap PVC piping like this of the right diameter you want, cut a section of it, a small section, and simply place it here on top of your sand former and then build around it. And then you should be able to pull it out at the end. You could of course buy your chimney and then build it straight into the mixture. So put your chimney on that and build up mixture around it. What I found is of course when the chimney gets hot, the metal expands and it causes slight cracking in the arch. I have come up with a slightly more elaborate idea which you can choose to follow or not, which I'll demonstrate. So you've got your sand former as demonstrated before, which is to the shape of the door you've got, and then a suitable distance back from the door between the door and where your dome starts to go up here. you would build up your refractory mixture, the Heatproof Screed material, up and over all of this sand former and up against this pipe. The pipe would obviously then create the opening you want for your chimney. Once you've done that, you then slot down a wider piece of piping, leaving a gap maybe a finger's width. And you would then fill this gap all the way around and to the top with mixture. So this piece of tubing, this second piece, is about 20 centimeters high. So what you would create then, you would create effectively a short chimney base made out of the Heatproof Screed material. So your refractory mixture, because you would then take the first piece of pipe out and then take this second piece of pipe off, leaving just a ring of refractory mixture. Provided the internal diameter of this second piece of pipe is slightly smaller than the diameter of your chimney, you'd be able to slot your chimney over this fairly short chimney base. To be able to secure it over that. Because these are plastic materials, there should be minimal risk of them getting stuck in the mixture. You should be able to pull them out fairly easily. This chimney is over this bit here, and there's a little bit of tolerance between the metal chimney and the mixture, meaning there's less chance of it cracking. So if I had to do the chimney again, I think I would go for this method. Although some may think this is overly elaborate. I think it's a good way to get a solid, secure base for your chimney, and also trying to minimize cracking, because your expanding metal of your chimney is not then actually built into the archway itself. You've made this mixture foundation which you're then putting the chimney, slotting the chimney down over onto. Before adding the final layers of your oven, you need to make sure that the dome has cured properly. First, you need to allow it to air dry, just following the instructions on whatever product you're using, the Vitcas Heatproof Screed, for example. And then after the initial curing period, you can take the wet sand out, the sand former, remove all of the sand, scrape everything out as much as you can, clean the floor out. But then you need to have a series of curing fires to further dry the mixture. Now, I recommend you look at specific guidance on curing fires, but the basic principle is very simple. You just have a series of small fires starting at a low temperature and then building up temperature over the days to go hotter and hotter, to slowly drive out more moisture from the mixture, to make sure you don't crack the dome. Because if you go full blast to begin with, have a big roaring fire, try and get the oven up to 300-400 degrees centigrade, you could easily crack the dome, and you will see steam rising out of it and see water coming down the outside of the walls. So then once you've gone through that curing process and the dome is properly dry, you could then add your insulation layers. If you add your insulation before doing the curing fires, the moisture from the dome is then just driven into your insulation. For my insulation, I use this material, which is Vitcas ceramic fibre blanket, which is therefore malleable. It's very easy to shape. It's also very easy to cut. It comes as a large roll. For a domestic size oven, given how much I've got left over, you could probably do 2 layers of this. And this is 50mm thick. So you could do a 100mm thick double layer of insulation on your oven. I only did 1, but I think most people would say that more insulation the better. I only used 2 pieces of the insulation for my dome, I think. One much larger piece and then a triangular piece at the back. But you can do it however you like and the best way you find to fit it. It's just a question of cutting it to shape and getting it to be as tightly compacted to the dome as you can. On top of the ceramic fibre blanket insulation, I use this, which is oven wire from Vitcas. It's similar to chicken wire, but the apertures are smaller, which creates more purchase for the final layer of oven cement you're going to apply. So I'd recommend you get this. It's not expensive. I think it makes it slightly easier than using chicken wire. In terms of applying this and getting it to stick over the insulation blanket, I found the easiest way was just to pin this into the fibre blanket itself. And you can actually put fencing staples through the wire and into the fibre blanket, and it will keep it there. For the final layer on top of the wire and the insulation, I use this, which is Vitcas outdoor oven cement. It's also what you can use for the jointing between the fabrics, which is its main purpose. Similar to the Heatproof Screed, you follow the instructions, mix it up with water in a tub, and then you can apply it on top. And I kept mine quite rough because I was going to add on this final cladding of stone. But theoretically, you could have the outdoor oven cement as your final finish. So you can make it smooth and make it a perfect dome shape. And once you've done that, and the outdoor oven cement on your final layer is dry, you can then add whatever final finish you like. As I say, in my case, I added a final kind of cladding layer, but you could put some kind of tiling or any other type of finish you want, of course. And at that point, you can also use normal building materials. So this final stone cladding layer was put together using regular mortar. So it's not a heat-proof mortar. And ultimately, of course, the final finish is entirely your own choice. It's down to your own aesthetic. I chose natural stone because it fits in this environment, and I was building up the walls next to it of the same material, so it looks in place. If I lived in the south of France or the Mediterranean somewhere, or Southern California, I would go for the white stucco type finish. In fact, if you're looking for some style inspiration, I'd recommend you check out the Wood-Fired Oven Chef channel. In fact, I saw recently started following me as a subscriber to my channel. Lord knows why, I've got nothing to teach him. He does videos about how to cook with a wood-fired oven, and he's got a beautiful oven. With a lovely tiled doorway. That's my favourite oven I've seen a video of, so if you're looking for some inspiration, then check out his channel. So if I made this oven again, I would do it quite differently, to be honest. I think the way I did it, in fact, is a bit overly complicated and also more expensive. I think the best options are to have insulation board a Fibre cooking floor, and then to use the combination method of having a ring of Fibricks around a circular shape, mark out a circular shape that you want, the right diameter, a ring of vertical Fibricks, and then to use my steel fire pit as a former to make the dome top out of a Heatproof Screed material, making it separately and then lifting it up onto the ring of Fibricks. I would have used a freestanding door, not a hinged door in a frame, just a freestanding door like the one I showed you earlier. Made a former out of sand for the archway and doorway, using the door as a template, and then use that method I showed you for the chimney. I think using that method I could have got more thermal mass in the floor and the walls of my oven, but actually for less money. And also I just think that using a doorway that's freestanding that you can pull out and put to one side is actually easier and better than using a hinged doorway. But if I did it again, that's how I would do it. I don't claim to be a total expert by any means. I'm just talking about my experience in terms of how I did it and how I would do it again, and some of the options I looked at and considered, hopefully to help some of you a little bit in terms of informing you of the different ways you could do it. And I think the method I described, the way I would do it again if I was making it again, is quite simple, it's quite straightforward. It doesn't require any real skill or any real tools, specialist tools or anything, and anyone could have a fair go at doing that. And I think it's quite low cost. I think that would probably cost you 2/3, maybe even half of what I paid for all my materials. So thank you for watching. I hope this is helpful to a few people at least. And once again, thank you to the video sponsors, Vitcas, who've got some really good products and materials, and they sell everything you would need: Fibricks, the Heatproof Screed material, the oven cement, and so on. Various doorways. They sell accessories for the oven, which they were kind enough to send to me, pizza peels, brushes, and so on. So please do check them out. You can look at the links in the description if you want to look at specific products. Anything I showed today will have a link in the description. And yeah, thanks for watching.